This to me is probably could become a game changer of sorts. We can't be self-reliant if the transport system relies on fuel.
Can India actually quit petrol now?
If we are not able to clean transport, I don't think we'll be able to address air pollution.
For someone who is planning to buy either a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler in the next couple of years, what should they be doing? Is this the beginning of the end for petrol in India? Is India actually EV ready? As they say, never waste a crisis, but how should we do that with the Gulf War especially? And don't forget the bigger crisis, climate change. Delhi announced a policy to start phasing out fossil fuel vehicles of certain segments. It's still a draft, but it's a policy being welcomed by many, including Amit Bhatt, the India head of the ICCT, which is the International Council on Clean Transportation. That's the organization famous for exposing the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal many years ago. Amit, thanks very much for making time for this Chakra podcast. Many issues to talk about, from cheaper costs for consumers to national security and to new, hopefully flourishing businesses and jobs. But let's start with what the Delhi government did. The government is often criticized for not doing enough on air pollution. Now it's proposing to phase out certain fossil fuel vehicles for the first time in India, as far as I'm aware of. Many of the proposals feel like this is a big pivotal moment, but there is invariably a gap between promises and implementation. Is it likely to be the same this time? What is your assessment?
No, thanks, Chetan. And I think, as you know, earlier this month, the Delhi government came up with the draft EV policy. I think there was very interesting provisions, but a couple of provisions which really caught our attention. One was kind of phasing out internal combustion engine three-wheelers from as early as next year. Then there is also a provision to phase out two-wheelers, which is roughly about 3/4 of Delhi's motor vehicle registration fleet from April 2028. And then, very interestingly, they also have target for electrifying school buses, 10%, 20%, and 30%. Now, this to me is probably could become a game changer of sorts for clean transport in India. I'll tell you why. Historically, for the last 10 years, government has been advocating, promoting clean transport through electric vehicles. Now, whether it is FAME 1, FAME 2, or even the recently launched PME Drive, along with multiple states coming up with their own EV policy. With all this push, we are still at single-digit EV registration in India. In fact, in some of the segments like cars, we are way below even the global average for some of the developing economies. Now, the reason why it is that, because subsidies, which were inherent nature of these policies, can only take you to a limited amount of vehicles. Why? One, because you don't have money to subsidize all their vehicles to convert to electric. That is one. Secondly, with subsidies, the onus is on consumers to buy these clean vehicles. Now, the benefits of, let's say, electric vehicle is not only that customers get good quality of vehicle. The benefits also includes cleaner air, and you and I are in Delhi, and you know, air quality is a year-round problem. It's also climate change. It's also on energy security. And the West Asia crisis has kind of given us a stark reminder why we need to think more carefully. So if the benefits of electric vehicles are across society, then why should only customers be responsible for buying electric vehicles? I mean, why not the manufacturers also sell electric vehicles? And so this is something that we call a supply side regulation, which means you also push OEMs to sell electric. And there are largely two ways of doing it. Either you phase out internal combustion engine vehicle registration, like Delhi has done, or in combination, you also give a certain proportion of targets to OEM to sell a certain proportion of their fleet as electric, which is what California has pioneered for many, many years. Now, when you bring these two policies together, the transition happens very fast. So while everyone agrees that we will eventually transition to electric when it comes to motor vehicle. We also have to understand that transition has to be in a shortest possible time. And so Delhi coming up with this policy is a great start. In fact, if you remember, Chandigarh actually came up with a similar policies a couple of years back, and then it was it did not see the light of the day. And therefore, I am very hopeful Delhi, even though the policy is in draft stage, we are still, government is seeking comments and doing consultation. We are hopeful that this will be kind of finalized for two reasons. One, it will not only help Delhi to clean its air, but it will also be a benchmark for the rest of the country. And as you know very well, good or bad, whatever Delhi does, the rest of the country follows. So if Delhi is able to kind of drive this point of phasing out internal combustion engine, the impact will be at national level.
Before we go into the entire country, I think the critical angle here is air quality. Delhi, of course, has been labeled the most polluted capital, but it's worth noting that even India's cleanest places, the pollution level in the top 5, for example, they're all in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, Madikeri, Tirupur, Mysuru, Chikmagalur, and Tirunelveli. Even there, the average PM 2.5 level is well above the WHO's safe guideline. So, building on what you're saying, let's zoom out. Why should someone in Pune or Hyderabad or Kolkata care about what Delhi is doing with EVs?
No, absolutely. And I think there are two ways to look at this question, right? So one is the ambient air quality. Now, let's say someone in Coimbatore may have an ambient air quality which is less than what someone in Delhi is breathing. But you have to understand that transport has a disproportionate higher impact on your health. So in simple terms, when you are standing on a busy intersection or when you are walking on the footpath on side of a main road or you are taking an auto or a bus, the vehicle exhaust fumes from the vehicles are directly coming to your body. So what you breathe on transport corridors is not the ambient air quality. You are breathing pollutants at much higher level. And therefore, someone in Coimbatore, someone in Pune, or someone in Bombay have to understand that you are breathing a much higher level of toxic air than what the ambient air quality is. So that's one. Second is that so one of the big issues with electric vehicle is the higher upfront cost. While in terms of operation they are cheaper, they are higher upfront cost. Now the question is, how do we bring down the cost? Now, you have to understand the cost is a function of demand and competition. Now, let's say if in case of Delhi, let's say after April 2028, no more internal combustion engine two-wheelers will be registered. Now, the manufacturers will have to sell electric because they can't let go this market. Now, what they know is that they now know that from April onwards, this is the demand that I have to sell. This is the demand for a total two-wheeler population in Delhi. What manufacturers will do is that they will invest in producing good quality products. They will also be very mindful that there will be competition, so the prices will be much more competitive. And what the benefit for the customer is that he or she will get a better quality product at a lower cost because there's a demand which has been created. And once the demand is created in Delhi, and once the Delhi starts this transition and sees the benefits, the other cities will also see the benefit. And therefore, as I said earlier, while Delhi's policy is catering to the geographic location of Delhi, the ripple effect will be across the country. And I think the ripple effect will be for good for the country.
So essentially, what you're saying is that Delhi has now switched to the stick approach, more sticks, less carrots. This was initially tried, the carrot approach was tried in, I think, about 5-6 years ago with subsidies and tax breaks and encouragement. But the government missed the 25% EV target. Now it's bringing the sticks, which means you literally cannot register a new two-wheeler petrol vehicle from, say, April 28, I think the date is.
Yes.
China and Europe did this as mandates and it worked. But can the same playbook of mandating change, of forcefully ensuring that petrol, diesel vehicles are not bought, can the same playbook work in India?
And that's why I think I will also give credit to Delhi government. Because in addition to the phasing out, they have also given incentives for this transition. So while China just put up blanket kind of have their phase out targets, they eventually started reducing the subsidies. In this EV policy, the Delhi government is also giving subsidies for this transition. So it's a carrot and a stick. Now, the question is, will this approach work in India? I think if you look at some of the experiments that have been done in India, in fact, we have been slightly more aggressive than what Delhi government has done. So if you look at about 25 years back, the whole CNG transition that happened, it was unparalleled transition across the world. That after a certain date, no diesel or petrol was allowed in the commercial vehicles, autos, taxis, buses, everything transitioned to CNG. So it's an unparalleled example in the world. Similarly, if you look at post-pandemic, we transitioned from BS4 to BS6, bypassing BS5. Again, this is unparalleled transition. So in transport sector, we have seen India taking leadership role in many of this transition. So I personally don't believe why we can't do this. Now, I understand that the incumbent automakers, some people who will be impacted, are resisting this change. But please understand that technological transformation in motor vehicles is happening across the world. China is selling more electric cars than internal combustion engine. In fact, they also registered more electric trucks than internal combustion engine. Germany, Europe, around 25% electric vehicle sales. Norway is 96, 97%. Europe is saying we will not register internal combustion engine cars after 35. So the question is, if the whole world is transitioning, why should we be left out? And therefore, what we need, and which is what is the automaker is also asking, saying, give us some certainty of technology. And if there is certainty of technology, we will go and invest. Delhi is giving that certainty. And hopefully, will also be kind of have a positive impact in long run for automakers, because they now have to concentrate a limited set of technologies and deliver a good quality product at a very competitive price.
You spoke about the manufacturers. There is a pushback there is likely to be a pushback from them. There are already reports of that happening. Change is hard, especially at this scale. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the automobile sector is something like 50% of the manufacturing GDP, roughly. But there are other entrenched interests, like the ethanol and the CNG sectors or the lobbies. Are they on board? How do you get those on board? Because they will be threatened by this, or will this kind of EV transition have to work closely with them? I'm not sure how you see this playing out.
25 years back, CNG was probably the best technology available. And the government and the courts absolutely did the right thing for converting the high-emitting vehicles to CNG. But you have to understand that technologies also change over time. So, for example, there was time when people would use typewriters, but we eventually shifted to computers. Now, people manufacturing typewriters would have been negatively impacted, but I think many would have kind of progressed towards the newer technology. The same is happening in the automobile sector. So we can't say that something that worked 25 years back, we should also continue supporting it now. What we should figure out is, are there alternative uses for some of these fuels? For example, can CNG be used in some of the other categories? Can ethanol be also used in some of the other categories? And that is something that we have to figure out. Having said that, you also have to understand that till March 2028, a two-wheeler that will be registered in Delhi would legally be operational for at least for 15 years as per the regulation. So the petrol pumps would actually serve for next 15, 16 years. So we are not saying that all the petrol pumps or the CNG pumps will go dry from a couple of years. They will there. And that is what we have to understand, that eventually people have to transition. I mean, if you look at the case of Norway, most of the petrol pumps have now shifted to charging infrastructure providers. So they are still refueling vehicles. Instead of fuel, they are kind of charging. So this transition is bound to happen. Question is, can we be more prepared? Can we be more certain? And I think this is what the Delhi policy does, is that it gives certainty. Now, the current EV policy has not touched upon cars. We believe after this policy, maybe the next revision, they will also come up with something on cars as well. And idea is to prepare a long-term roadmap for various categories of it. When should we transition? What scale for transition, so that everyone is better prepared and impacts it very positively.
Cars have been touched, if I'm not mistaken, to a little extent that there are some tax breaks, I think, which will reduce year on year for the next 3 years.
Yeah. Yes, but
okay.
In terms of phasing out a mandate, they are not there.
Coming to the bigger picture, India imports something like 85% of its crude oil, and every rupee spent on petrol is a rupee leaving the country. Now, is electrification now an economic security issue or not just an environmental issue? And is the establishment willing to, beginning to look at it from that lens?
No, absolutely. And I said, as we talk about going Atmanirbhar or self-reliant, we can't be self-reliant if the transport system relies on fuel, of which almost 90% is what we import. And therefore, we have to absolutely look at moving away from this dependency on fossil fuel. Now, again, we're not saying everything will happen tomorrow, but we have to create strategies and chalk out a pathway for doing this. And so we have to look at alternative fuels. Now, credit to the government, they are also looking at alternative technologies, both electric as well as hydrogen. And there's a massive push towards green hydrogen. And I think what we believe is that actually we now know a pathway. The pathway is very simple, that you produce green electrons through renewable sources of energy, solar, wind, pump hydro, and maybe in some cases other technologies. And then you have two options. Either you store the green electrons in batteries to power vehicles, or in some cases you might convert them into green molecules, and then you can kind of use them in a fuel cell and then convert back into kind of green electrons and power vehicles through hydrogen fuel cell. So there are two broader technologies. Now, there would be some intermittent technology because this transition will take some time, maybe 10, 15 years. And that's where I think the role of ethanol, bio-CNG can come in, act as intermittent technology. But we have to create a roadmap which is based on these fundamental principles of driving our transport through clean fuel. And that's what I said, using renewables as a primary source of energy would absolutely help us in terms of not only securing this energy security, but also addressing the whole issue of climate change and health.
The Strait of Hormuz may reopen, the immediate oil shock may pass, but will the effect last long enough to actually speed up India's EV transition, or will we revert to the moment the oil prices normalize? I mean, it might take 6 months, it might take a year, and it'll be back to business as usual after that.
No, absolutely. And that's why I think we have to realize that this West Asia crisis has kind of, in a way, given us a jolt to reconsider the way we perceive energy security around the world. And therefore, this whole kind of the impact on global supply chains that probably the West Asia crisis will create will be there for some time. I don't think it will go away in just a couple of months. So it will continue for some time. And that's why it also gives an opportunity to kind of look at cleaner fuels, cleaner technology, cleaner transport in the given global crisis. India is not alone. I think other countries are also looking at this new reality and trying to look at how do we diversify our supply chains when it comes to energy security. And therefore, I think India, along with some of the other countries, will also kind of look at this and create a robust supply chain, which will be de-risked from some of these events like what we are seeing in West Asia. So I think we have to look at the ongoing crisis as an opportunity to really rethink the future of country, especially on energy and transport. And I believe we can absolutely do it.
One of the things you pointed out, and you wrote about that recently, is the challenge in RWAs or housing societies and apartment blocks. That there is some kind of there's a challenge in actually installing it, either because of the rules or because of the mindsets. Uh, Two-wheelers are 60% of Delhi's vehicle stock. I think that it's pretty much the same ratio in Bangalore, Chennai, Mumbai, a lot of the other cities. Now, these are not people with driveways and home chargers. They're delivery workers, gig economy workers, students. If Delhi can't solve the charging for them, no Indian city probably can. What's your diagnosis?
No, absolutely. And again, that's a fundamental question that we also have to address. Because if you look at the global data, and in fact, data from our Indian OEMs as well, 85, 90%, in many cases, 95% charging happens at home. Now, problem especially comes is that if you're not living in an individual home, but you're living in some kind of group housing society, because if you have to set up a charger for your two-wheeler or four-wheeler, and you have your parking, you need to get a no objection certificate from the Resident Welfare Association. Now, when I'm saying charger, I'm really looking at a 16 ampere plug. Now, we don't take this, and this is the same 16 ampere plug is what powers your air conditioners as well. Now, you may have 3 air conditioner in your house. You may not even communicate this to RWA. But if you want to set up a charging, you have to get an approval from RWA. And RWA, in many cases, don't even understand the concept of charging, the concept of how much power does a vehicle need. And a lot of them are still in this very traditional mindset of fear, maybe watching a lot of WhatsApp forwards, saying, what if the battery catches fire? What if the vehicle explodes? They lost a lot of these issues. In addition, the RWs also said that, but there is no government mandate for us to allow charging at. And I think this is something we have to address. Countries that have reached a very high level of electrification, for example, Norway, they have a policy, something called right to charge, which means if you have an electric vehicle, you have the right to set up charging in your designated parking. And your distribution companies, your municipal corporation, your RWS cannot stop you. So I think it's time for Delhi to maybe also relook at the right to charge concept, come up with the policy around it. And if, as I said, if Delhi can bring this policy, there'll also be a replication across the country. And on a personal level, I live in Gurgaon, and I've been struggling with my RWA for the last 4 years, and I'm unsuccessful to get charging at my parking.
They haven't agreed.
No.
And these are the objections that what you mentioned. These are some of the objections.
The first reaction is, agar aag lag gayi to kya hoga? What if the vehicle catches fire? And I've been telling them modern vehicles are very safe. In fact, if you look at the data, internal combustion engine vehicles catch more fire than electric vehicles, but no one talks about it.
You mentioned, spoken about China and Norway and Vietnam. I think has gone from near zero share of EVs in their fleet to something like 40-45% in just 5 years. To very rapid electrification. In India, auto manufacturers are pushing back. They're telling the industry bodies like SIAM that the market isn't ready, and honestly, they may well have a point. India has almost no e-motorcycle market. Charging infrastructure is inconsistent, and battery costs are still high. Are we forcing a transition before the ecosystem can support it? And I know you have mentioned that the Delhi model mandates this, but at a larger scale, these are serious challenges.
No, absolutely, there are challenges, but I don't think these challenges are something that we cannot overcome. Again, if you look back historically, when the court mandated CNG transition in Delhi, I don't think there was any vehicle that was ready for CNG. There was no CNG dispensation stations in Delhi. and everyone was saying nothing is there. 6 months, we had the vehicles, we had the infrastructure, and the transition started. And that is what I've been saying, that there are two ways to look at regulation. One is regulation that create market and drive change. The other way is regulation that respond to the current market and preserve that market. I think the West Asia crisis has told us that we should have regulations that can derive change. Because the change, and as I did CNG transition or BS4 to BS6 transition, when the regulation has come, the industry has absolutely positively responded to it. So there is no reason for us to doubt the industry saying that the industry will not respond. The industry will respond. So that's one. And if you look at some of the, even not look at developed countries, some of the developing countries in and around India, these countries have very positively responded to regulation. So as we mentioned about Vietnam, 40% of new cars are electric. In fact, we now have a very large automaker company from Vietnam coming at a global firm called VinFast. They are also set up manufacturing in India as well. Similarly, if you look at our neighbor Nepal, 5 years back, they had almost zero EV sales. Now they're at 75% EV sales. So much, much higher. Similarly, if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Singapore, 40% of new cars are electric. So this transition is happening. If you look at Africa, Ethiopia a couple of years back stopped registering internal combustion engine vehicles. So they are only registering. Even in countries like in cities like Kampala, in Nairobi, all these places EVs are taking. So the question is that the global transition is happening. If we don't transition, then we will be kind of a marketplace for old technologies getting dumped. That is something we don't want. Because you also have to understand with new technologies also comes new investment. And with new investments comes new jobs. We also have to create jobs. So if you look at some of the recent investment that has happened in India in the automotive sector, they have been around electric. So I think you have to understand it's also electrification of transport is also green growth story. It's also job story. And we have to look at that in this world of global transition, we should not end up being a region where old technologies are getting dumped.
Two things that you spoke about, and then seeing the bigger picture on that. There are two success stories. The CNG transition, which happened, which was at the state level, largely. It began with Delhi. And the leapfrogging from BS4 to BS6, which really worked very well, and the government pushed it through. Should India adopt this kind of approach where it's not state by state? Delhi does an EV policy, then Karnataka might do it, and then UP might do it. But it should actually be mandated at the national level. Would that make sense? Would that be a better call?
Absolutely. And in fact, as we speak, there's definitely an opportunity that exists to push electrification at national level. And that opportunity is called CAFE, or Corporate Average Fuel Efficiency Standards, which are getting finalized. Now, CAFE standards are vehicle efficiency standards. In a way, they kind of help to reduce the fuel that goes into the vehicle. And they are measured in terms of CO2 emissions per kilometer of vehicle run. Now, the logic is very simple. That if you tighten the fuel efficiency, automakers will have two options. Either they can get more refined internal combustion engine vehicles, or they start bringing new technologies. Now, for a reference, let's say Europe has a target in 2035, the average CO2 emission from cars will be 0 gram per kilometer. So 0 gram CO2 per kilometer from 2035. Now, they're not saying you have to sell electric. They are saying whatever you sell should have...
Is that compared to current cars? If you can give some sort of...
Yeah, so roughly
comparison.
they are about close to 50. I think 48 or 49 they are. And then they will eventually transition to electric. We are currently at 113 grams CO2. Our draft proposal is looking at about 78, 79 grams CO2 per kilometer. Now, the so the two is either you can bring in more efficient ICE vehicle to meet the target, or you bring more technologies like electric. After a certain point, you cannot meet the target with internal combustion engine because the laws of thermodynamics don't permit you. Let's say a 0 gram CO2 per kilometer, you absolutely cannot do it with ICE vehicle. So either you bring an electric or you bring hydrogen fuel cell or some new technology. Now, if for us, if the CAFE standards are tightened enough, then we will see, because these are standards which are at a corporate average level, which means they are models, they are not at model specific level, they're at average sales. So OEMs will have to then sell a certain portion of fleet as electric, and then they can meet the target. So if the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and Ministry of Power bring in a stringent CAFE regulation, we might see a fairly rapid electrification in India, and that will not even require any investment from the government, because the OEM which will have to meet the target.
By OEM, you mean the
Manufacturers.
car manufacturers,
Car
Mahindras, the
yes.
Tatas, Marutis, Hyundais. They would have to produce a lot more electric cars so that the overall emissions are
Exactly.
reduced or meet the standards set by the government.
Yes.
And these are now being tightened. That's what the new CAFE draft says?
Yes and no. So draft regulation that came out, I think, has a fairly good and ambitious target of 79 grams CO2 per kilometer. But it also gives a lot of giveaways in terms of, for example, if you have a flex fuel electric vehicle, a flex fuel hybrid vehicle, you get a lot of benefits. Now, the problem with that approach is that flex fuel is not available in India. And it will take some time for vehicles to come. But automakers can make 10, 12,000 rupees investment in their cars and create something called a flex fuel compliant vehicle. And they will get all the credits and meet the target. Similarly, there are super credits given to technologies. Now, super credit is not, in simple terms, how many times the vehicle will be counted. So, for example, if you sell a vehicle, if you sell one vehicle and the corresponding super credit is 2, it will be counted twice in the calculation. Now, if you give super credits to hybrid technologies, then you are really not that much improving efficiency. So if the Bureau kind of tightens these giveaways, it will have a huge implication on the EV sales. But you have to understand that the current draft targets around 10% electrification in the next 5 years. Niti Aayog has talked about 30% electrification by 2030. And in fact, we did some internal analysis to just collate all the voluntary commitments from car manufacturers. So, for example, Suzuki has a target of 15% by 2030. Tata Mahindra looking at 30% by 2030. So if you average all the voluntary commitment, India should be somewhere around 20% by 2030. Now, there's a Niti Aayog target of 30%. Voluntary commitment is 20%, but the current regulations target 10%. And that's where there's a little bit of mismatch. So if these are stringent, if the giveaways are removed, we will see a fairly rapid electrification in India in the next 5 years or so.
Mandates are all very well, instructing manufacturers to make more, making sure that consumers can only buy electric. But a more fundamental question, does India actually have the resources to make so many electric cars? We are heavily dependent on, global supply chains, which are usually dominated by countries like China, maybe a couple of others. Do we have the capacity to actually step up electrification at such a high rate that you are calling for?
And that's what I've been saying, that definitely is a need to diversify supply chain. And the post-West Asia crisis, countries around the world are now realizing the importance of diversification. But you have to understand that diversification or the benefits of diversification can only happen. There is a demand for the technologies. For example, if a OEM in India wants to diversify and get the entire supply chain, uh, indigenize all the supply chain to an extent possible, that manufacturer will also have to understand, okay, what is the demand of this technology in next 5, 10, 15 years, right? And so unless we create demand, because these are private entities, ultimately they're all looking at the top line and bottom line. So unless they see demand, they will not invest. And unless they invest, they will not diversify. And that is why, even if you look at China, China is at a global, as a major player in global electrification. The first thing that they did was they created demand for electric vehicles in the country. And once the demand got saturated, started looking at other countries around the world.
China has also, tied in all its supply materials. It's got the raw materials. India is not in that comfortable position. It's far from it at the moment. That's what I meant. That do we actually have the, the rare earths and any other kinds of materials that may be required,
And exactly, and that's
and
what
the
I'm saying.
technology?
That, for example, let's say lithium. Now, lithium is not manufactured; it's produced in India. The mines are in Latin America, Australia, and all these places. But countries have done bilateral agreements and got these mines to process the material. But the fundamental question is, they have done this because there was a demand in the country. So automakers said, okay, if I get all this lithium, what will I do? And then they realized, look, there is enough demand in my country to sell the vehicle. Right? And that's how the economics work. Similarly, if we create demand in our country, in India, for these vehicles, you will see manufacturers doing all these kinds of adjustment, tie-ups to develop new mines, process materials, process minerals. All these things will happen, but they will not happen if there is no demand. So if once the regulation creates demand, all these, the automakers will try to kind of diversify supply chains and deliver. But the key fundamental question is demand. Without demand, this diversification will not happen.
So, just to understand this from the manufacturer's point of view, for someone who works in the auto sector, how should they be looking at the transition? More upsides or more downsides?
No, I think if you look at people manufacturing working in this segment, we have to first understand that India automobile segment is not only kind of supporting the country, it's also supporting some global places. So we also export vehicles now, be it Europe, be it Latin America, Africa. We also export these vehicles out of Asia. And that's what I'm saying, that if some of these countries are going to stop or transition away from internal combustion engine vehicle, and if we are not kind of proactive enough to come up with technologies, we will lose these global markets. Right? So that's one impact that will happen. Secondly, if cities and states at sub-national level start addressing air pollution issues, and which they should, there will be a transition from internal combustion. So if at a global level, at a local level, if transition is happening, if we don't transition, then someone else will come and fill up that gap. And therefore, for people in the automotive space, you have to understand that we have to be part of this transition. We cannot be left out. So yes, certain sectors will require changes, but there will be a new set of entities which will also get created. So net in net, I think this transition will create more jobs. It will create more green jobs for us. This is a sunrise sector. There will be a lot of demand for skilled workforce in this segment. And that is what the big opportunity is. So we have to manage the transition. And if you are able to create a pathway, we can absolutely manage this transition with minimal or no impact as such.
From the consumer's point of view, for someone who is planning to buy either a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler in the next couple of years, these are usually very expensive purchases for any household, any family. what should they be doing? Should they be switching to EV straight away or wait? Because there's a factor of government rules which will say that which will make it easier for them to buy. There's also the factor of that the buying costs, the upfront costs are very high, and versus the running costs, which may be lower than fossil fuel vehicles. What would you advise somebody wanting to buy a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler in the next couple of years?
It's an important question. I think a couple of things that come to mind. One is that, so cost is one, but let's say, for a moment, let's remove the cost part. You have to understand these are much better vehicle in terms of technology. I mean, you ask a lot of people who have shifted to electric, almost everyone will not go back to internal combustion. So the ride quality is very great. Technology, the connected features, just the look and feel of these vehicles are far superior than combustion. Now, one of the issue is that these vehicles have a higher upfront cost, but now we are seeing innovative models like battery as a service coming in, which have also brought down the cost fairly significant. And in some vehicle segment, the cost is not that different. So if the budget permits, if you are able to absorb a little bit of higher upfront cost, ICT should absolutely go for electric. We now have very good products available. A lot of them are Indian companies. So that's one. The other thing we'll have to keep in mind is that the charging infrastructure. Now, let's say if you're living in individual housing, absolutely you can go because you don't have to worry. In fact, you can get solar also installed. Then you are actually using complete renewable energy to power your vehicles. But if you are living in a group housing society, then at least you should get some kind of community charging in place so that even though it's not personal charging, it's a community charging and charge the vehicle. But if you can have charging at your parking place, nothing like it. So to me, I think if you are able to address the charging, whether it is community or personal, in group housing society, you should absolutely go for it. Or if you have a charging at your workplace, that also does wonders. So if you are able to resolve some of this, I think there's no reason why you should not buy electric, even at the current levels of electrification.
I think that's a really an upbeat approach to this. Last couple of questions. Now, game this out. It's 2030. Delhi's policy either worked spectacularly or failed visibly. What does each scenario look like, and what does this mean for for India's broader climate and energy goals?
So, and I think probably I will be slightly more optimistic. I think Delhi government will be able to pull this off. So, in terms of starting to register only electric from 2028, that is two-wheelers, will also send a ripple effect, at least for the neighboring states as well. And we will see a fairly robust levels of electrification in Delhi, at least in NCR. And that to me will have a fairly strong positive impact, at least on the exposure part, because we will start seeing improvement in terms of exposure from pollutants from transport side. Second, I think this will create a pathway for this transition to happen. We will see more products coming into the market. I personally feel there will be a fairly significant price reduction as well for these vehicles. And so we will see a better product at a good competitive price to the residents of Delhi and NCR. And that's where we will see the start of this transition, which the country is looking at for many years. So I am very hopeful that Delhi will be able to pull this off. If not, then I think we have a serious problem to address because transport, as I said earlier, is one of the most important reasons for air quality in Delhi. And if you're not able to clean transport, I don't think we'll be able to address air pollution in Delhi.
In a place like Delhi, transport is something like about a quarter at least of Delhi's pollution. What would you want to say as we wrap this up? What would you say to every person watching this and take note of before they, move on to the next video, hopefully another Chakra video?
So I think one, you have to understand that electrification of transport is not only a technological shift. It's not that you're replacing one internal combustion engine vehicle technology with a electric vehicle technology. Benefits or the impact of electrification is much wider. It is on air quality. It is on climate change. It is on green growth. So there are multiple benefits for electrification. It's not just pure technological transfer. So that is something you have to understand. The second part you have to understand that it's a global movement which is happening. So it's like people are moving away from typewriters to computers. We still want to continue using typewriters, even though the world is moving to computers. That is something, it's a massive technological transition. And third is that ICE vehicles have reached a level that I don't think will be any further refinement possible. So it's a technology that has matured for the last 100 years. It has reached a stage that I don't think there could be any further much refinement to happen. While electrification has just started. So you will see better products, more competitive products, more feature-loaded products coming in. And that's where you will enjoy the benefit of it. So in a nutshell, it's a technological transformation which is happening, and we have to be part of it, else we'll be left behind.
Very quickly, is this the beginning of the end for petrol, at least in India? Can India actually quit petrol now?
I think it's a beginning of a fairly active conversation to end petrol ICE vehicles at least in Delhi NCR. We have seen fairly substantive reduction in diesel vehicles, at least in Delhi. And now we will see a reduction in other ICE technologies as well.
Amit, thanks very much for joining this podcast. And I think if Delhi can emerge as the benchmark or as a model for the rest of the country, and if it does actually stick to this ambitious EV policy, that would be welcome for multiple reasons: air quality, the climate crisis, and of course, most importantly, perhaps national security, national and economic security. Thanks very much for making time for this. And if you're tracking EVs, do subscribe to this. We are doing a special mini series on EVs in the backdrop of the Gulf War and the climate crisis. Any questions you have, please mention them in the comments and we'll get back to you. Thanks very much.